Aloha and welcome to the G'day Sally show. I'm Sally Squires, entertaining the world. So tonight I'm going to read you another story from my book Footsteps to Fairy Forest. And you remember this whole book is about a little girl who finds a map hidden down in a rusty jam tin at the back of her grandmother's shed, and when she opens it up, it's got 26 footsteps to Fairy Forest. So every morning she sets out with her compass and her bucket and spade, and she finds another footstep. So today we're up to footstep 18. We're getting there. There's 26 altogether, so one day we'll get to the end of this book. This morning when I woke up, I went to my windowsill and I was happy to see that Willie Watcher was there. He was having a bath in his water bowl. But that's not all. There was a tiny baby bird with him. I guess he had been away spending time with his family. I was so happy that he had brought his new baby for me to meet. I spent so much time with him and his baby bird, who I called Baby Billy, that I was running late in leaving to search for footstep 18 and meet a new fairy. I started to run down the path to catch up, but soon the pathway was so crowded with high grass and bushes that I had to slow down and walk at my normal pace. Today I was to be on the lookout for 3 tiny golden coins, and I didn't want to miss seeing them, so it was good that I had slowed down. It was a very cloudy day, and I wondered if it was going to rain, but soon a breeze blew up and blew the clouds away to let the sun come out. The grass was so high and tough that it was getting very hard for me to walk through it. I worried that I had missed out on seeing the 3 gold coins because they might have been hidden in the grass. I stopped and turned my bucket upside down so I could sit down and check my compass. It had been so hard finding the path through the high grass that I was worried I might have strayed off from the north-northeast direction that I was supposed to be following. This path was nothing like the path to footstep 2, the first time I had followed the path north-northeast. The sun was getting hot, and I could feel my map getting warm too. I didn't want the sun to burn a hole in it, so I put it into the inside pocket of my summer jacket and folded up my jacket and put it into my bucket as I started walking again. I was facing the high grass and preparing to push my way through it when, to my surprise, a herd of deer came out of the grass towards me. And luckily for me, they had been running towards me in a north-northeast direction, so they had kindly flattened down the grass along the path I was supposed to take. There were some baby deer running along beside their mothers, and one of them stopped running and came up to me and nuzzled my ear. It tickled and I laughed, and then the deer vanished as if they had never been there. I was very grateful that they had flattened the grass for me, so now I could continue to look for the 3 gold coins. As I started to walk again along the flattened grass path, I wondered how I would see the gold coins if they were underneath the grass. But just as I was wondering about that, a baby rabbit hopped out of the grass at the side of me and started to hop along in front of me. Suddenly she stopped and started to paw the ground. She looked like she was digging for something, so I went up to see what she was after. It was then that I caught a glimpse of something shining through the grass. Yes, you've guessed it. It was a tiny gold coin. I got out my spade and moved away the grass, and sure enough, there were 3 tiny gold coins. I started to dig down for the stone for footstep 18, but the rabbit was still digging too. It found a juicy root and started to chew on it. Then a strange look came over its face, and it spat out something. When I checked, guess what it was? Yes, it was the stone which said footstep 18. I let the rabbit continue chewing while I waited for the fairy. And in a minute and a second, a blue and pink flash flitted past the baby rabbit. The fairy tickled me as she ran up my leg and onto my arm. Then she sat down right onto the 3 gold coins in my hand. She said her name was Rumpunusta, and that she was the running fairy. And then I fell asleep. So now we're going to hear about Rumpunusta, the running fairy. Rumpunusta is a little bit different to all the other fairies. You see, she loves to run rather than fly. And she is such a good runner that she can run as fast or even faster than the other fairies can fly. Not only that, but she can run from cloud to cloud up in the sky, just as if she were flying. Amazing, don't you think? Not only that, but she can run from tree to tree right across the forest. You see, fairies are lighter than air, so that's why Rumpunusta can run through the sky. And if you were to see her running so fast, well, you wouldn't even know you were looking at a fairy. All you would see would be a flash of light, blue and pink light, as she ran from place to place. One morning, when all the fairies woke up and tried to fly, they found they couldn't. Each one of the fairies tried and tried to fly, but nothing happened. It was as if their wings were welded shut. What were they to do? Flying was like breathing to a fairy. It was second nature. The first fairy to notice it thought that there was something wrong with her wings. She didn't know that this non-flying was affecting all the other fairies in Fairy Forest too. Now, you might not know this, but each of the fairies in Fairy Forest has a tiny fairy house in one of the trees that surrounds the magic circle in the very middle of Fairy Forest. So as each one of the fairies woke up that day and found that their wings were not working, they walked. Yes, a very strange thing for a fairy to have to do. They walked out of their little fairy houses, carefully closed the front door, and walked right into the middle of the fairy ring. One of the fairies, and I'm sure you'll remember which one, yes, that's right, Arcanasia fairy, the fairy of the air, knew about not being able to fly. But none of the other fairies in Fairy Forest had ever had the experience of their wings not working. And as they all gathered in the very centre of the fairy ring, in the very middle of Fairy Forest, a flash of blue and pink light rushed past them. It was Rumpunusta. The other fairies called out to her before she could pass them by and flash out of the centre of the circle. "Rumpunusta, please stop running for a minute and a second," they cried. Suddenly the blue and pink flash came to a halt, and the other fairies could see that it was indeed Rumpunusta. "What's wrong?" asked Rumpunusta. "I was just about to patrol the forest to see if anyone needs my help." All the fairies said together, "That's it, we do. We need your help. None of us can move our wings. We can't fly. It's terrible." Rumpunusta was astounded. "You can't fly? None of you? Why?" "We don't know," said the fairies together. "When we woke up this morning, none of us could fly. We need you to find out what is wrong." "What about your magic spells and your fairy dust?" asked Rumpunusta. "Have you tried to get back your flying abilities by casting a spell?" "Nothing works," said the fairies sadly. Rumpunusta thought that she would try out a spell to see if perhaps she could help the fairies to fly again. She pulled out a handful of magic fairy dust from her special secret pocket, and she sprinkled fairy dust all over the other fairies and all around the special fairy ring in the centre of the forest. Then she waved her magic fairy wand, which was made of tiny shoes, and tried out a spell. "Unicorn Universe Unusual. Fairies flying faithfully, always and forever. Rick, rock, rack, wreck, ruck." The fairies all waited a few seconds to give the spell time to work. Then each one tried out her wings, but sadly nothing happened. Their wings just would not wave or even wobble a bit. This is indeed a puzzle," said Rumpunusta. "You just all wait here, and I will run all over the forest and find out what has happened to your flying ability." And Rumpunusta set out to find the answer to the mystery of the non-flying fairies. She ran all over the forest and up and down trees and round bushes and looked under flowers and even checked out all the birds' nests and the squirrels' holes, but she could find nothing to explain why the fairies' wings were not working. Finally, she sat down on a stone and thought about this problem. Then she had an idea. "I haven't checked above the forest," she thought. "That's what I need to do." So she got up and started to run so that she was just a very faint blue and pink mist. In fact, if you had been watching her run, it would have looked like she had disappeared entirely. After a minute and a second, Rumpunusta was above Fairy Forest. She could see all over the forest. She looked north, then she looked south, then she looked west, then she looked east. So far, nothing seemed unusual. Then the fairy looked at all the compass points in between, and finally, when she was at the very last compass point, she could see what looked like a big black cloud on a hill. It looked like it was just hanging there and was not going to move. Rumpunusta put on a sudden burst of speed towards the hill to check out the black cloud. But to her surprise, when she got there, she saw that it was not a black cloud. It was an ogre, and he was dressed all in black. He was chuckling to himself about how clever he was. "No fairies flying forever," he said out loud. "Never no more." The fairy ran right up his leg, jumped onto his arm, and ran up to the tip of his nose. The ogre thought that she was a fly or a mosquito, so he tried to swat her off, but the fairy stood firm. "Excuse me," said Rumpunusta, "why don't you want fairies to fly?" "And who wants to know?" asked the ogre quite rudely. "I do," said Rumpunusta. "I am Rumpunusta, the running fairy. Why have you cast a spell so that the fairies can't fly?" The ogre looked angrily at the tiny fairy, but she was not afraid. "I am Augusto, Angry Ogre, and yes, I did put a spell all over the forest so that the fairies will not be able to fly." "That is a very harsh thing to do," said Rumpunusta. "Fairies need to be able to fly so they can help anyone who needs help." Augusto, Angry Ogre, looked as if he was going to try to swat the fairy again, but then he stopped himself. "I have my reason," he said. "Well, please tell me what your reason is," said the fairy. Augusto, Angry Ogre, hesitated for a second. He looked a little bit sheepish. "Promise you won't laugh," he said. Rumpunusta crossed her heart. "I promise I won't laugh," she said. "Well, it's like this," said Augusto. "Just recently I fell in love with a fairy." "That's very sweet," said Rumpunusta. "I can understand that." "But," said Augusto, "she doesn't love me and she won't come and live with me. So that's why I have stopped all the fairies from flying, so I won't be reminded of the fairy I fell in love with." "Well, fairies need to be free," said Rumpunusta. "They have many jobs to do, and they can't just settle down with an ogre or anyone else." "They can't," said Augusto. "So it's not because I'm an ogre that she couldn't live with me?" "No, that's not it at all," said Rumpunusta. "She couldn't live with you because fairies all live on their own, so they can leave at a moment's notice when someone's in trouble. They have to be free." "Well, I didn't know that," said Augusto. "So I guess I should take back my spell and let the fairies fly again." "That would be a very good idea," said Rumpunusta, "and all the fairies will be free to help you if you ever need help." So Augusto, Angry Ogre, said his magic spell to allow the fairies to fly again as usual. Original Ogre Outlandish. Fairies flying free forever. Oog moog noog gloog. So that was the story of Rumpunusta, the running fairy. You know, Hawaii is a microcosm of the world, with people here from all over the world. And Noa Noa Hawaii is a microcosm of the traditional arts of the world, with beautiful patterns from many countries. They've been in business for more than 40 years with wonderful Hawaii-designed batik clothing. Their hand-dyed and handmade clothes have patterns that are based on traditional kapa and tapa designs from Hawaii, Polynesia, Micronesia, Indonesia, even New Zealand and Africa. So check out the wonderful items that Noa Noa has on their website, www.noanoahawaii.com.